Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I head out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It is a lovely day here in suburban Chicago. The weather is cool, the sky is cloudy, and I'm walking home from the library. I hope you enjoyed the comparison between underwater cities and terraforming Mars that I did in the last episode. I enjoy doing these sort of duels, and I'm frankly surprised that I haven't done either of those games in a duel before. I did double check on my website that I hadn't done that, but boy, it feels like I probably should have. So hopefully that was productive and interesting for you. With the move on to this next episode, I changed from the situation I was in, which is one of talking about games I'm thoroughly familiar with, into the opposite, which is talking about games I've just barely tried. That's right, it's time for Shooting from the Hip Triple Shot. Shooting from the Hip is a podcast episode where I talk about 3 games that I've tried for the first time and give you my first impressions of these. As usual, I've only played these each once or twice, so big caveat there in terms of my experience. This is just giving these games a try. All right, so let's jump into it. The first game I want to talk about is mrcabbagehead'sgarden. This is published by Ludicreations from designer Todd Peterson. Todd Peterson has shown up in our podcast before. He was the graphic designer for Ludicreations game Pocket Imperium, and more recently for the sort of dice rolling push your luck solo game, what's it called? Might just be Detective? That's not right. Private Detective, I think. Well, we arrive with another Todd Sanders solo game, and this is Mr. Cabbagehead's Garden. In this game, you play the titular Mr. Cabbagehead, managing your garden while you try to grow the vegetables that you need, while also preventing your neighbors from stealing all of your good vegetables. Your goal is to create a garden by the end of the game that will impress the judges from the town fair who are going to come by to look at it. It's a pretty simple premise, so let's just jump right in. First off, design. Todd Peterson is a graphic designer, and his games are always beautiful to look at. This is true of the detective game. This is true of Mr. Cabbagehead's Garden. His mode has always been, or for those 2 games, has been to find available public art and then use a graphic design to take that art and make an interesting game from it. So in this case, we are dealing with different kinds of plants and vegetables, and the judges are people who like plants and vegetables as sort of weird characters with vegetable bodies, and the neighbors are also vegetables. So the way the game plays is this: you have a deck of cards, and at the beginning of the game you get these judges, and the judges are looking for particular things. So as you're playing, you're going to be trying to build your garden to satisfy the things that the judges want to see. That's how it starts. The way that you play the game, the way you take turns, is that you're going to draw 3 cards and lay them out, and you're going to pick 1 card to go into your garden, and 1 card to go in your garden. If you pick the card on the left, you have to pay a bumblebee. If you pick the card on the right, you get to get a bumblebee from the hive. And if you pick the card in the middle, no, your bumblebee status does not change. Now this is important because if you are ever out of bumblebees, you can't take the card that requires you to pay one. And if the hive is ever out of bumblebees, you can't take the card that requires you to get one. So you are really locked in to one or the other. Like the game gives you an external balance that helps sway your decision which of the 3 cards to take. In addition, the cards that you take are all vegetables, and then when you take them, you have to put them in your garden. Now, like with a lot of games where you're building, the garden is a tableau. It's a grid of, I think, 12 cards. I'd have to go look at the rules again, something like that, like 12 cards, 3 rows and 4 columns. Maybe it's 18 cards. It's 18 cards, 3 rows and 6 columns. And here's the thing, until you have met the width or height of the grid, you're not locked into where in the grid you've placed your cards. So when you put 1 card down, you haven't indicated what part of the grid it's in. When you put a second card down, it's just now 2 cards in the grid. They're not locked down. So it's not, once you have 3 cards in a vertical manner, then you've locked in your 3 rows. And once you have 6 cards across, you've locked in your 6 columns. But you have some flexibility before that. At the end of the game, you're going to score for sets of vegetables that are near each other, and you're going to score for the kinds of things that judges want to see. There's a variety of different things that judges are looking for. The third factor in the game is your neighbors. So the way the game works, the game's cards are divided into 3 piles, and each pile has an on vacation card in it at the bottom. So at the beginning of the game, you're going to play 15 cards, which is what you're going to add 5 cards to your display, and then you get an on vacation card. So it must be 5 rows, or 5 columns, not 6, because the very most cards you could have would be 15. Maybe 12, I don't remember. With each card that you take, the 2 that are left over have numbers on them, and whichever number is higher determines how many of these tokens you draw. And the tokens you draw have one of 3 neighbors' faces on them. At the beginning of the game, you're going to pick 3 neighbors to be your potential house sitters for this particular play of the game. So over the course of the 5 turns, you are going to pick out some number of these tokens. And at the end, when you go on vacation, whichever neighbor has the most tokens on it becomes the person watching your house. They're going to watch your garden for you while they're gone. This is important because each of your neighbors, while they're helpful enough because they're going to water your lawn for you or water your garden for you, they're also greedy and they're going to take some vegetables. So the idea is each neighbor likes to take a different kind of vegetable. And so there's a balancing act to be played where you want to set up which vegetable your neighbor takes so that they don't take a vegetable that's crucial to a scoring condition that you're aiming to meet. If that sounds pretty complicated, I don't know that I can boil it down too much more than that. Suffice to say, the back and forth and ebb and flow of needs and desires in this game is really pretty interesting. And the neighbors who come and watch your vegetables are interesting in a variety of ways. And the choices you have to make when you're drawing cards are interesting in a variety of ways. And the game looks very pretty. So this is pretty great. It's more satisfying than the detective, the private eye game that I have. I do like that game as well, but that game involves a significant amount of dice rolling, and I think the more controlled luck at work in the card play of this game I find to be more satisfying from a gameplay perspective. From an art and design perspective, this game is beautiful, really lovely to look at, and the theme is just very amusing. The neighbors are all sort of really funny pictures of people who have some sort of aspect of vegetable to them. Like one of your neighbors, it's like Mr. Carrot, and he only likes carrots, so he doesn't want you to plant anything next to carrots, that sort of thing. So if you get a chance to try out Mr. Cabbagehead's Garden, I recommend. Fun game, interesting to start with. The second game I want to talk about here is Godzilla Tokyo Clash. This is from Prospero Hall. In this game, you play Godzilla or Mothra or Mechagodzilla or, I don't know, there's one that's like a mole that digs around in the ground. You play those 4 things. On your turn, you are going to play a card that lets you do a thing. If the card says momentum on it, it lets you do a second thing. Basically, the idea is you are fighting with the other monsters to gain the title of King of the Monsters and take control of the town. You get points for wrecking stuff. You get points for walloping your opponents. Each time you hit one of your opponents, you're going to take a card from them. Or, if you do 2 damage or 3 damage, you can take 2 or 3 cards and you pick the best one. You're going to pick one of those cards, put it in your score pile. So you're not only reducing the things they can do, but you're also increasing your score by taking the cards with the cool score amounts. I thought this game was fine. Some of the iconography left a little to be desired. There was some complexity between the different types of attacks, whether an attack was ranged or not, and how that played out was a little confusing. The miniatures were really fun. They looked just like Godzilla and Mothra and the mole guy, I guess. And so from that perspective, that's really neat. The game does come with a couple little plastic buildings and a bunch of small tokens. All in all, it was a fine game. Pretty simple, but I think that's the idea. Prospero Hall does aim for family weight, accessible games rather than sort of really intense gamerly games. Each player has their own deck of cards, which provide a lot of theme. So, if I'm doing an attack, it talks about things that I'm doing that I was playing Godzilla, that Godzilla could do, that other big kaiju couldn't do. So from that perspective, it was pretty awesome. All in all, though, I would say on the mediocre end of game experience, certainly not a game I would buy, and not a game I would probably volunteer to play all that often. But, if somebody had it and they were enthusiastic to give it a play, I would certainly play, and I would enjoy myself in the activity of it. It ran a little long for my taste, but other than that, it was a pretty fun time. So that's Godzilla Tokyo Clash from Prospero Hall. The third game I want to talk about today is Vindication. Vindication is a Euro game with an elaborate theme. It is very much a resource management and expenditure game where you are gathering cubes of different colors and spending those cubes to complete tasks of different colors, and then gain cards in those colors, which give you the ability to complete tasks and gain more objectives. Now, from one perspective, that I stole all the theme out of there, which isn't really nice. But on the other hand, this game, the theme does not really connect to the gameplay at all. So here's the part I find frustrating. So the theme is that you are a terrible villain who is trying to redeem themselves on this island. And you're trying to redeem yourself by doing a variety of heroic activities. And the heroic activities give you like hero points, and at a certain point when you've accumulated enough of a certain kind of material, you can become redeemed, and that gives you some points. You can get various kinds of mounts which allow you to move around the area faster, let you get redeemed in that way. And then, like I said, you can do different kinds of tasks. You can acquire companions who allow you to redeem yourself. You can do different kinds of tasks that get you points that way. You gain skills, you can gain heroic items, you can fight monsters. But the thing is that all of this is represented on this very flat hex board, and the activities are all the same. Like you have a companion, you have different kind of companions, and while the companions have like named skills, what they're really doing is they're giving you cubes in a certain color. And so it is a resource management game of the supreme type. It's thematic in its description, but the way that you interact with the game is entirely mechanical. And the theme really ends up just being about how well you explain or how often you use that theme. That you could play this game and not have the theme come through at all. And I suppose there's an argument to be made that the same is true of Lords of Waterdeep, that a lot of the theme of Lords of Waterdeep comes from choosing to call things that. But, Lords of Waterdeep is played on a map of the city of Waterdeep. Vindication is played on a circular board of hexes, and the hexes have like the most generic iconographic look to them, which has its own kind of pleasure. Like, it looks really nice, but it makes it very hard to maintain the theme. I had a good time playing this game. There are some really neat mechanisms in it. The best is that the end game triggers. At the beginning, there's 2 on the board, and each time someone passes one of the milestones in scoring, 15, 60, or 15, 30, 45, or you start at 15 points, so 30, 45, 60, 75, and 90. You bring out a different end game objective, so the game becomes more and more likely to end the more people pass a particular scoring objective. And that works really well. You have secret scoring objectives, and there's a variety of different ways to get points. You're competing in a lot of different categories, and so if you have the most of a particular category, you get points for that. So that part's really, that all works really well, and the game is really satisfying and fun that way. But from a theme perspective, it's almost entirely absent. And I don't think the game gives you very much motivation to try and use the theme as you're playing. So from that perspective, it was a little bit of a letdown for me, because I thought the theme was interesting at least. But from the gameplay perspective, I enjoyed it quite a bit, and I would happily play Vindication if somebody got it out, and if somebody said, hey, I'm having people over to play Vindication, do you want to come and play? Yes, I certainly would make that journey. It's not probably a game I'm going to seek out to buy, but in terms of gameplay, it was really fun. And I'd urge you to give it a chance if you get the opportunity. Well, thanks for joining me on my walk today. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.